So I want you to imagine waking up tomorrow morning in a completely strange city.
Oh, that sounds terrifying right off the bat.
Right. Like the architecture outside your window is totally unfamiliar. You walk out onto the street and all the signs are written in this alphabet you can't even begin to decipher.
Yeah, total isolation.
Exactly. You reach into your pocket and there's no wallet, no phone. And worst of all, when you try to remember your own name or where you came from or how you even got there, there's just this complete void.
Just zero memory.
Zero. It sounds like the opening scene of, I don't know, a high-concept sci-fi movie, but it is a very real, intensely unsettling phenomenon that has actually happened to human beings over and over again throughout history.
It really has.
So welcome to this custom-tailored deep dive. Today, we are looking at a curated stack of sources detailing 10 infamous cases of people who seemingly just appeared out of nowhere.
Which is such a fascinating topic.
It really is. And the mission for our deep dive today is to, well, separate the historical facts from the internet fiction. We want to examine the actual physical mechanics of what happens when that fragile concept of human identity is just erased, and ultimately figure out why these specific stories captivate you and me so deeply.
Yes.
So, okay, let's unpack this. Because before we can look at the real medical mysteries and the people whose minds actually broke, we have to look at how easily human beings invent impossibilities.
Well, we do have this profound discomfort with the mundane. If you look at the psychological drivers behind urban legends, society just loves a blank slate.
I really do.
We love an anomaly because we can project our wildest theories onto it. When someone appears out of thin air with no context, the human brain abhors that vacuum. We rush to fill it, often with the most fantastical, reality-bending explanation available.
Just because the alternative is boring.
Exactly. Simply because the alternative is boring.
So if you're listening to this, you've almost certainly fallen down the rabbit hole of internet mysteries at some point, and you've probably scrolled past the story of Rudolph Fentz.
Oh, yeah. A classic.
Right. We all know the basics of the legend. It's June 1950. A bewildered man in heavy 19th century clothing is wandering around Times Square. He gets hit by a taxi and dies.
Right.
And the police find 1870s currency in his pockets, a saloon token, and a business card for Rudolph Fentz, a man who supposedly vanished without a trace back in 1876. So boom, instant time traveler.
The internet absolutely loves it.
They eat it up. But when we actually dig into the sources, the whole time traveler theory falls apart instantly.
It completely falls apart. And it falls apart because the context of fiction was violently stripped away by decades of repetition. Rudolph Fentz wasn't a time traveler, and he wasn't a historical anomaly.
Yeah.
He was literally just a character from a short story.
Wait, really? Just a story?
It's just a story. It was called I'm Scared, written by Jack Finney in 1951. Over the decades, someone transcribed that story into a paranormal journal, but they totally forgot to mention it was fiction.
Oh, wow.
And then someone else cited that journal as fact. It's really a textbook example of how the mechanics of a rumor work.
Wait, hold on. Even the part about a real man named Rudolph Fentz vanishing in 1876, I always thought there was at least like a nugget of historical truth there, and maybe the internet just embellished the taxi part?
No, the 1876 disappearance was totally part of Jack Finney's fictional narrative.
You're kidding.
No.
Yeah.
The author invented the historical record to make his sci-fi story feel more grounded. The internet just ripped the fictional evidence out of the book and presented it as real-world proof.
That is wild.
It just shows how repetition creates reality. If you see something stated as a fact on 10 different forums, your brain shortcuts the verification process and just accepts it.
Which perfectly brings us to John Zegrusa, the famous man from Tord. So the legend says it's 1954. This guy lands in Tokyo with a passport from a country called Tord, which he says is located between France and Spain. Authorities show him Andorra on a map. He gets super angry. They lock him in a heavily guarded hotel room. And the next morning, he has vanished into thin air.
Yep, the classic interdimensional traveler trope.
Right. But our sources say this is just another massive distortion.
A huge distortion. The actual event didn't even happen in 1954. It happened in 1960. Zegrusa was a real man, yes, but he was essentially just a mid-century con artist.
Just a normal guy.
Yeah. He was arrested in Japan for using a forged passport written in a completely made-up language. The passport actually said Tuard, not Tord, and he claimed it was in Africa, not between France and Spain.
Oh, so the whole geography part of the myth is completely wrong.
Completely.
Yeah.
And he definitely didn't vanish into another dimension. The Japanese authorities simply sentenced him to prison for fraud.
Okay, but if he was just a standard fraudster who went to jail, How did that super specific detail about vanishing from a locked, guarded room get added? Because that's a very weird, impossible detail to just organically sprout up.
Well, that is the fascinating part of collective myth-making. When a story moves from historical record to urban legend, it undergoes this sort of evolutionary pressure to become more engaging.
Like a game of telephone.
Exactly. A guy going to prison for a fake passport is a narrative dead end. But a guy vanishing from a locked room, that is a mystery that invites endless speculation.
Right.
People actually added that locked room element in the late 90s on early internet message boards, mostly because it transformed a boring bureaucratic footnote into a cool sci-fi protagonist. We see the exact same psychological mechanism in much older historical cases, too.
Like Gil Perez in 1593, the palace guard in Mexico City who supposedly teleported from the Philippines in a single day, and he accurately reported the governor's assassination months before a ship could bring the news. Or the Hirashigahama alien in early 1800s Japan, the pale, red-haired woman washing ashore in a hollow vessel guarding a wooden box. Modern forums constantly frame these as teleportation or UFO encounters.
Right, but historians view those cases through the lens of cultural anxiety, not physical reality.
What do you mean?
Well, take the Hirashigahama woman. That is a classic Edo period myth. Japan was highly isolationist at the time, so the idea of a strange, pale foreigner arriving in a bizarre craft was really just a manifestation of society's fear of the outside world encroaching on their borders.
Oh, that makes total sense. And Gil Perez.
The Gil Perez story didn't actually appear in print until over 100 years after the supposed event. It was a retroactive legend built to explain how quickly rumors traveled through the Spanish Empire.
It's basically like a modern optical illusion. People want to see the hidden image, like the dimension hopper or the alien, so badly that they actively choose to ignore the boring reality.
Absolutely.
But, it's easy for society to crowdsource a fake narrative. The dynamic shifts completely when we look at an individual who intentionally fabricates their own identity to escape their life.
Yes. We move from collective myth to individual survival strategy, and the psychology behind that is incredibly complex.
Let's talk about the escape artists in our sources, specifically Robin Van Helsum, known to the internet as Ray or the Forest Boy. This is a super recent one.
Right, from 2011.
Yeah. So a 17-year-old kid shows up in Berlin. He speaks broken English and German. He claims he has been living in the wilderness for 5 years, surviving in the woods with his father, and he says he just buried his father out there before walking into civilization.
Wild story.
And the Berlin authorities completely bought it at first. They gave him shelter, financial support, and even launched this massive police hunt for a corpse in the woods.
They bought it because the narrative tapped into a primal archetype, the feral child, the innocent survivor. It triggers a really profound protective instinct in authority figures.
But my question is, if you were a teenager trying to run away from home, why invent a scenario that practically demands a massive police investigation?
Yeah.
Like, if I'm running away, I'm calling myself Steve, getting a job at a diner, and keeping my head down. I'm not inventing a dead dad in a forest. That just invites a giant spotlight.
You're thinking about it logically, though. A runaway is often operating from a place of intense emotional trauma or desperation. They invent these massive, dramatic barriers not to invite a spotlight, but to build an impenetrable wall between their new life and their old one.
So the bigger the lie, the thicker the wall.
Exactly. The problem, though, is the resource expenditure. Extreme fabrications demand an unsustainable amount of mental energy from the liar, and they force authorities to expend massive resources.
Which draws even more attention.
Right. Ray cost Berlin a month of intense investigation. The lie was just too big. The spotlight got too bright, leading to a public photo release, and a former acquaintance in the Netherlands instantly outed him. He was literally just a runaway.
It really feels like the era you live in dictates the success of the lie. Because if you pull a similar stunt in the 19th century, you can get away with it for a long time. Look at Yofara Ворина in 1850.
Oh, Ворina's a great example.
He shows up in a German village speaking broken German, claiming he's from a country called Lexaria, located in a region called Sacria. He says he writes in Obermium, follows the Aspasian religion, and shipwrecked on his way to Europe, which he called Uplar. It is just this massive world-building exercise.
It is, and his story survived much longer because 1850s academia operated completely differently. I mean, there were no digital databases. Academics of that era were obsessed with discovering lost civilizations.
So they wanted it to be true.
Very much so. They wanted his story to be true because it offered academic clout. Some scholars even invented theories to justify his claims, suggesting he came from an alternate timeline or an undiscovered region where the Ottoman Empire had vastly expanded, pointing out that Sakarya sounds like the Sakarya region in Turkey.
But the geography completely falls apart if you look closely. I mean, if he's from Turkey, how did he get shipwrecked traveling to Europe? They are connected by land.
Yeah, that is the fatal flaw in his world building. Vorin had names for other continents, Avlar, Aslar, Oslar, but he completely failed to mention the Americas.
Oof. Big miss.
Right. That omission points heavily to a simple embellishment by a person with a very localized, limited geographic education. He built a complex lie, but really it was just the lack of rapid communication in 1850 that protected him from immediate exposure.
So far, we've looked at intentional fakes, internet folklore, and teenagers running away. But what happens when the hoax isn't crowdsourced and it isn't a deliberate lie?
This is the really heartbreaking part.
It is. What happens when the brain simply does it to itself against your will? The mystery morphs from an intriguing puzzle into a profound tragedy of failing mental health and massive bureaucratic blind spots.
Yes. This is where identity goes from being a fun philosophical discussion to an urgent medical reality. Conditions like dissociative fugues, severe amnesia, and psychotic breaks physically sever a person from their own context.
The most famous modern example is probably Andreas Gрассля, the piano man. In 2005, he was found wandering the streets of Kent, England, in a soaking wetsuit, completely silent. When hospital staff gave him a pen, he didn't write his name. He drew a beautifully detailed grand piano. They brought him an actual piano, and he sat down and played brilliantly for hours. I look at this case kind of like a computer rebooting in safe mode.
That's a really good way to put it.
Yeah, like when the main operating system, your identity, your language, your history totally crashes, the brain relies on its most basic, deeply ingrained routines just to communicate.
The safe mode analogy is incredibly apt when you look at the neurology behind it. What you are describing is the difference between episodic memory and procedural memory.
Okay, break that down for us.
So episodic memory, the autobiographical data of who you are, your name, your past, is heavily reliant on the hippocampus. In a severe dissociative fugue, extreme stress or trauma can flood the brain with cortisol, essentially shutting down the brain's ability to access that autobiographical network.
But if he can't access his own history, how does he know what a piano is, let alone how to play complex sonatas?
Because procedural memory, the physical mechanics of how to do a learned task, resides in entirely different brain structures, primarily the basal ganglia and the cerebellum.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, those areas aren't blocked by the fugue state, so his brain literally couldn't tell him his name, but his hands perfectly remembered the physical act of playing music.
That is just staggering. And the media speculation ran wild, thinking he was a famous maestro who suffered a breakdown. But the clues trickled out. He pointed to Oslo on a map. He sketched a Swedish flag.
Right.
Ultimately, he was identified as a 20-year-old Bavarian man who had experienced a severe mental health crisis. And once he was identified and returned home, he reported having absolutely no memory of the event.
None at all.
But while Andreas got treatment, our sources show that not everyone is that fortunate. Some people get entirely crushed by the system.
They do. When a person loses their internal context, they become entirely reliant on the external systems of society to catch them. And those systems frequently fail. Take Cornelia Rau.
That case is so frustrating.
It really is. In 2004, she was traveling through Queensland, Australia, calling herself Anna Brotmeyer from Munich. She was acting incredibly childlike, giving highly conflicting accounts of her life, and carrying a Norwegian passport.
And because the name Anna Brotmeyer didn't exist in any database anywhere, the Department of Immigration just treated her as a suspected illegal resident.
Exactly. They treated a psychiatric emergency as a paperwork anomaly. In reality, Cornelia was suffering from schizoaffective disorder, a condition that features symptoms of both schizophrenia-like delusions and a break from reality and mood disorders. She had actually left a hospital in New South Wales, but instead of recognizing a severe disease, the bureaucracy transferred her to a women's correctional center.
Which is just awful.
Her mental health deteriorated rapidly in prison. It took her family spotting her in a newspaper article to finally get her out. She was wrongfully detained simply because her disease had erased her verifiable database identity.
Think about your own wallet right now. It just shows how reliant we are on documents to prove we exist. If you don't have the paper, the system literally doesn't know what to do with you.
It doesn't.
And the absolute extreme of that nightmare is Benjamin Kyle. In 2004, he was found unconscious, severely sunburned, and covered in fire ants behind a Burger King dumpster in Georgia. He had no memory of who he was. The only thing he could remember was a birthday, August 29th, 1948.
The physical reality of his situation is just chilling. He adopted the name Benjamin Kyle just to have a placeholder. Local law enforcement, the FBI, U.S. Marshals, and Interpol all got involved.
Yeah.
And they found absolutely nothing.
That's the part I struggle with. How does the FBI and Interpol find nothing? He's a living human being in the modern world.
Because modern identity is a web of interlocking databases, and if you aren't in them, you are invisible. He had no social security number that matched his fingerprints. He had no bank accounts. For over a decade, he was caught in an agonizing bureaucratic limbo. The government legally classified him as missing but present.
Missing but present. I just can't get over that phrase. If you are missing but present, you can't get a traditional job because you can't fill out an I-9 tax form, you can't get housing assistance, you can't even get a library card.
Precisely. The system requires continuity.
Why?
Without it, you are locked out of the basic functions of society. It took over 10 years and advanced genetic genealogy cross-referencing his DNA with massive ancestry databases to finally figure out he was William Burgess Powell from Indiana.
10 years?
Yeah, he had simply slipped through the cracks. Yeah. It forces us to realize that the mysterious amnesiacs we find so fascinating are usually just symptoms of profound systemic isolation.
We've seen the internet hoaxes, the desperate runaways, the heartbreaking neurological tragedies. But there is one case in our stack of sources that perfectly blends every single one of these possibilities together.
Oh, this one is wild.
It's a case that has left history completely baffled for almost 200 years.
The ultimate historical enigma, Kacper Hauser.
Yes. In 1828, this bewildered teenage boy stumbles into the city of Nuremberg, Germany. He can barely walk. His vocabulary is almost non-existent. He's holding 2 letters.
Right.
And the story he eventually tells is that he spent his entire life living in a pitch-black cellar, eating only bread, drinking water, and playing with a little wooden toy horse. That was the entirety of his existence.
He was the ultimate blank slate. And because he arrived with almost zero context, 19th century Europe lost its collective mind over him. Kacper Hauser basically became a mirror.
What do you mean by a mirror?
People projected whatever narrative they desired onto this boy.
Well, his life trajectory is insane. He goes from being a feral child in a cellar to being adopted by educators, and eventually he becomes an office clerk under British nobleman, the 4th Earl of Stanhope. He learns to read, he writes his memoirs, and then at the age of 21, the story ends in bizarre violence. He is fatally stabbed in a garden. And we still don't know if it was a political assassination or if he stabbed himself to get attention and accidentally struck too deep.
The theories surrounding him showcase our need for narrative satisfaction. The most famous theory was that he was the hereditary Prince of Baden, swapped at birth and hidden in that cellar to alter the royal line of succession.
It's very dramatic.
It transforms a sad, strange boy into a tragic, romantic hero.
But the science finally caught up with the romance, didn't it? Modern DNA testing on the blood-stained clothing he wore when he was stabbed largely disproved the royal theory. He was not a lost prince.
The genetic evidence definitely closed the door on the royal lineage, but the core truth remains entirely inaccessible. Was he genuinely a tragically abused child kept in total isolation? Was he a brilliant, manipulative con artist who fabricated the cellar story for sympathy and housing, much like the Forest Boy?
Or was he suffering from a severe, undiagnosed psychiatric condition?
Exactly. Despite 2 centuries of investigation, history cannot give us an answer.
It's incredible. We sit here and analyze these sources, we look at the hoaxes and the fugue states, and they reveal something deeply uncomfortable about how we live. To you, listening to this deep dive right now, your identity probably feels like a solid, unshakable foundation. You know exactly who you are.
But these stories prove that it's actually incredibly fragile.
So fragile. Your identity is largely just a collection of electrical impulses in your hippocampus, holding on to episodic memories, backed up by a few pieces of government-issued paper. Whether it's the piano man retreating to the safety of his basal ganglia, or the Burger King amnesiac trapped for a decade as missing but present, these cases are a massive reality check.
We are tethered to reality by our external context. Your relationships, your daily routines, your digital footprint, they form the structural scaffolding of your personality. When you physically or neurologically remove that scaffolding, as we've seen today, the structure of the self is terrifyingly vulnerable.
I want to leave you with a chilling concept to mull over today. Think back to that scenario we started with. Waking up in that unfamiliar city, unable to read the signs, with your memory completely wiped clean. If a sudden trauma took every single episodic memory you have and your digital footprint vanished, How much of your core personality would actually remain? Would your specific sense of humor survive the wipe?
That's a heavy question.
Would your kindness, your irrational fears, your ambitions still be there? Without your history and without society to constantly remind you of your place in it, would the you sitting there listening to this right now actually survive the loss of your context?